Can you hear me? Okay. So my cam is on, and I trust that you guys can see me too, right? Okay. And I'm also sharing my screen. I need a confirmation that my screen is shared. If you can see it, please type 1 or perhaps yes. Okay. So all set. We are on our way. So what is it that we have today? Two things, as a matter of fact. We're going to start off with the beach of Falesa. We're going to finish it off and then make the transition to the new part. And it's a new part, and it's also a new genre because we're doing short stories this time around. So when we finish with the beach of Falesa, which is more or less you know, a contribution to the traditions of novels and novellas, we're going to move on to the short stories. And with the short stories, we have the Dubliners by James Joyce. James Joyce happens to be a short story writer and also a novelist. So we'll talk a lot and much about James Joyce because of how important he is. His novel contributions cannot be missed. We'll talk about him when the time is right. Now we're going to, like I said, finish off the beach of Falesa first. So what is it that you still remember about the beach of Falesa? Because this is, I take the second class that we're doing the beach of Falesa, and I'm sure you have perhaps read a lot. First of all, you read the primary source, which is the novel or novella, and then after that you moved on to the secondary sources. You read critical material on and about this novella, right? So what is it that you still remember? Nov is talking about the fact that it's hybridity, the fact that it is a hybrid genre or a hybrid novella, where by hybridity, of course, we mean that it is cross-generic at one point. It also has different elements, a bit of everything, right? In terms of narrative, in terms of ideas, and in terms of techniques, right? We spoke about that. So together with what Noof is saying about the hybridity or the high hybridity of this novella, what else comes readily to your mind? Um, okay. Kamar is saying the novella received negative feedback. There is no such thing as feedbacks. Yeah, Kamar, this is this is a bit uh, language. I mean, I'm talking from the linguistic point of view. There is no such thing as feedbacks. Feedback is not countable. So that's why we don't have feedbacks. You don't have a feedback and you don't have feedbacks. This is I know is off point, but I just wanted to to make sure that you know that. Anyway, let's go back to what Kamar said. Kamar said the novella received negative feedback because of how different and how prudish. Let's coin this word instead of saying how a prude it is. We're going to say how a prudish, and this is going to be copyrighted. How a prudish it is from the setting to its characters. Okay, so there was backlash, like Kamar is saying, and perhaps Kamar needs to elaborate on this, and the fact that there is negative feedback and why and stuff like that. Sarah is also talking about the reception of the novel and how negative it was, which is more or less a variation on what Kamar is saying. So it's either Sarah or Kamar. I would like one of you to come to the mic and perhaps talk about this part, uh, um, or this issue. If you guys have the mic ready, you can always ask, and I'll allow you. Kamar wants to say something. Okay, Kamar, go ahead.
Um, yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. At least me, I can hear you very well.
So this, yeah, so the novella received negative backlashes because, first thing, the characters were unfamiliar. They were native characters, and the ideas of the story were unfamiliar too. That was, as we said, the interracial marriage and the bad white people, the traders, and there is also the unfamiliar setting, the island. It all confused the English readers. They didn't know how to react to the book. Also, the author used realism, but in a different way. He used it in his own way, which was way to create an illustration
So
or
what?
an
Let me
illusion.
stop you here, Kamar, and ask you a question about. So what kind of realism were they expecting back there during the Victorian age?
They were expecting the realism that comes with the romance, the realism, the genre realism. That was like the realism of England,
Hmm.
the idea of England, the Industrial Revolution, that kind of realism, I believe.
Hmm. So
But then,
concerns that they can relate to. Back there, right?
yes, yes,
Good or
yes,
bad,
of course,
right? The idea of
yes,
respectability, observing and subscribing to the conventions of the time, thinking of themselves as the best of all possible people in
yes,
terms of
yes,
education, right? But this is not.
yes.
This is obviously not
The
happening in the beach of Felisa, right?
Yeah, they wanted the realism, but the realism of the English community they were living in. They wanted a realistic image of their own community, but then the author Stevens took it and he showed them a realistic image of the island where he was
Hmm.
living, the native, the use of Pidgin language to make it more realistic. And there are a lot of ideas from temples. He used temples and magic and the traditions and the beliefs of the island people, island
Mm.
Pacific people.
You mean that the okay, things that were not there, and that they don't accept the idea of for them, whoever is not white, whoever is not Christian, whoever is not perhaps blue-eyed or green-eyed is other, with all the negative associations of the word other, right? Um,
Yes,
Savage,
barbarian.
barbarian, uneducated, right? Remember what happened with remember the sign of the four and what happened there with the Indians and what they used to think of them, and right? And
Yes,
nice, nice. It's almost the same kind of reaction that you would expect of Victorian readers trained and raised to consider themselves as the best in everything. So if a writer of their own comes and reflect a different reality because he lives somewhere else, that would be frowned upon and that wouldn't be accepted, right? Okay,
yes,
nice,
of
nice.
course.
Okay.
They even said he was going native.
Yeah, which is obviously very derogatory or very ironic and sarcastic in a very negative way. And sarcasm can be positive sometimes, right? But the way they used
Yeah,
it
so doctor,
is very negative.
they were saying, he's giving away his white roots and becoming a native island. He's giving away his education, his cultures, his
Mm.
belief, all that, right?
Yes, absolutely. So no sense of tolerance, no sense of acceptance of others and their beliefs, no respect whatsoever, a total disregard of other people, as if they are. They believe that they don't exist. For them, those people do not exist, and if they exist, they have to be inferior and subservient to them, right? Great. Thank you so much, Kamar. Perhaps the mic is also open for anyone if you feel um, the urge to come up and talk. I mean, the mic is yours. Perhaps Sarah Al Hariri, we haven't heard her in a while. Sarah, if you have something to add, if you have input to contribute, you would be um, you are more than welcome. Perhaps Nov at one point was trying to kind of use the mic, but she never did. We also have Nabila, right? Is Nabila here with us, or am I confusing between A230A and A230B? I don't know whether we have Nabila here in this course. Oh, okay, so Nov's mic is still broken, but hopefully it will يعني be fixed soon, inshallah. Okay, we have perhaps two gentlemen in class. We have Fahd, I think, and I don't know what the name of the other guy is. If you guys, if you would like to come to the mic and say something. No. Okay. So it's okay. It's okay. I mean, you guys, it's a free world, like they say. Anyway, so again, like I said, it's a continuation of the efforts that we started last time about the beach of Falesa, and then again we make the transition to the new part and the new, perhaps the new book and the new everything actually. With Joyce, we're going to have a big shift of emphasis, shift of interest. I mean, cultural shift. We're leaving. Actually, we're leaving England behind and moving to Ireland. And with Ireland, we have perhaps a totally different story. We have a totally different set of concerns and circumstances. So you're going to like it. I'm not going to spoil it yet. Let me finish with the beach of Falesa first. So, in terms of main points, if we talk about the beach of Falesa, we're going to talk primarily about the character of Stevenson, Robert Stevenson himself, the fact that he was different in his upbringing. He wasn't obviously in need of money. He came from a well-off family, but he was a little sick, and that kept him indoors, and that also would allow him the golden opportunity to read and read and read and come up with ideas and become a writer. I mean, he tried his hand in different genres. He wrote poetry for children, and he wrote short stories, and he wrote children literature, and he was an established writer. At one point, he would decide to leave all this behind and go and live in the South Seas in the Pacific. Again, when he goes there, as if he's starting from scratch. He wouldn't depend on how he used to write, the training that he has been receiving for quite some time back in England, and he would chart new ways in terms of technique and in terms of themes and ideas, right? And perhaps this would come as a shock for his fans back in England. They are used to a certain type of writing with established and well-known techniques. For you as a writer to come all of a sudden and say, no, I'm not playing your games anymore. I have my own rules of engagement now, and I'm going to start a new way, a fresh way of looking at things in terms of techniques and in terms of ideas. Of course, I mean, people are normally kind of not very accommodating to things that they don't know. I mean, if you don't know about something, you approach it with doubts and suspicions um, and all these kinds of. And this was exactly the reaction that he got when he published um, his novels and short stories, where the setting is primarily islands in the Pacific and the South Seas. The reaction, like Kamar and Sarah said, was all negative, and he was people started um, to negatively refer to him as giving up on his heritage and culture and opting for something strange and weird. They would accuse him of offending their sensibilities as white, as British, as the masters of the world. Remember, this is the 19th century, or mid and towards the end of the 19th century. We're talking about Britain as a major power in the world. We're talking about a major empire that has colonies in lots of places around the world. Okay, so they have this sense of superiority, and they don't look at other people, non-English and non-European and non-Christian. They would look at them as inferior, as savage, as uneducated, violent and bloody, and all these kinds of things. So to have them as central characters, to have their concerns and their daily activities as part of your project as a novelist, to have this would be obviously bad and distaste in their eyes, and they would the only thing that it's only natural that they are going to communicate these negative feelings and these negative reactions in their overviews and reviews and their critical material. Okay, so let's leave them behind, the Victorians, and let's go to the novella and see again what is so yeah, and let's talk about the internal structure. Let's talk about the themes and the ideas, and also the techniques. Like we said, Stevenson was writing a realist novel, but his realism does not coincide with and does not correspond to the realism of the mainstream literary scene back in England. His realism is based on and is inspired by whatever he encounters on the South Seas islands that he now inhabits. So realism in language, according to him, would be not reproducing official standard English, but would be using what came to be known as Pidgin English. And we highlighted what Pidgin English is last time. It's this mix between standard English and the dialects and the languages of the natives back there. So you end up having a language or a kind of English or a variety of English that is broken, that is heavy in terms of accent. Remember, we spoke about this is realism, because um, if you are inspired by what happens on the islands back there with the natives, and you give me a language that is pure. The language that people in the Victorian age would use, I wouldn't consider you realistic or a realist. Again, realism would mean that you reflect what happens, not what should happen, right? In terms of language, we have Pidgin English. In terms of concerns and themes, we have the concerns and the themes of the natives back on the island. The novel or the novella, for the most part, is about trade and trade exchange, and it doesn't have the themes that we normally have back there in England. Remember, we have taken two novels so far that represent England uh, um, in the Victorian age. We have taken Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and we have taken The Sign of Four, and these are two different genres. I mean, within the novel traditions, of course, but I mean, if you talk about Wuthering Heights, that would be representing traditional novels in terms of how it is a three-volume novel. The concerns and the ideas are typically Victorian and even prior. Again, when we go to the Sign of Four, it is part of the traditions of detective novels, and it also has concerns that the Victorians can relate to and can, uh, um, kind of feel. But when you go to the beaches of Falesa, you have a totally, or the beach of Falesa, I'm sorry, you have a totally different story in terms again of themes and in terms of technique. So you wouldn't, if you look for a traditional type of realism, one that is similar to those uh, um, in England in the Victorian age. So obviously the Pichu Felisa is not the place for you, right? We're talking about a different brand, or a new brand of realism, whose material would be the natives of the islands in the Pacific, right? And their concerns and their ideas and stuff. Um, what else? I mean, if you look at the characters are also different. It is true that we have white people, we have Wiltshire, the central character, but we have his wife who is a native of the land, and she is as central as he is in terms of the projection of ideas. She has her own share of concerns and ideas, and Stevenson does not fail to kind of give that in the novella. What else if we talk about realism? So we speak about the language, right? We speak about the concerns and ideas, speak about the characters, right? So we keep saying that we're reading this novella against the prevailing ideas of home and abroad, right? So um, I mean, if you ask Victorians about um, how home inspired the novella is, they would say that it has nothing to do with home as they understand it. So home for them would be London and England, and even the confines of their houses and homes in the Victorian age. But these are things that are foreign to the novella that we're dealing with. We're very far away from London of the time. right? In terms of place and in terms of concerns and issues and events, right? So the novel is rooted in the idea of approach, if you like. Um, okay, and this is what makes it um, kind of not accepted and not welcome by the reading public at the time. They can have elements of approach, but they wouldn't tolerate it. They wouldn't accept to have a whole novel project written in places and in settings other than places that they are used to, London and the north of England and even south of England, okay? But to go as far away as the Pacific, that would be um, totally off the mark for them. Uh, that's a good question. Let me first of all see how you look at it, and then we go from there. Kamar. Kamar is saying, I feel like he made the island his home at some point because of his family. So if it's easier for you to come to the mic and say it all, Kamar, you may want. I mean, it's okay. The mic is on.
Yes, hello.
Okay, go ahead.
So at first, when I first read the book, I felt like he's the kind who would like make home the place where there's business, where there's benefit for him. But then when he married Uma and he started falling in love and kind of like defending the people of the island and like killing Case because he was like tricking them and deceiving them, that kind of made me feel like the island is his home. But then at the end he was so hesitant and questioning about his daughters if they're gonna be able to marry white people. He was not that accepting of the idea of
Yes,
nativeness and
yes,
that. So that made me feel like he is also not part of the island, so he's kind of has no home. And in the story, they never mentioned England, like he was from England or he went to England, how his life was in England or whatever. So I felt like he has no home.
Well, this is typical of people who, you know, it's not easy, of course, to get rid of your legacy and heritage altogether, even if you claim that you are so. There is obviously a difference between admiring a place and I mean embracing it, and then the next thing you know is that it becomes your home, right? You can admire. Remember, if you go back to Lookwood, remember how he used to look at the north of England. Remember at how he had high hopes and great expectations about the place. And once they fell short of the image that he has of them, okay, he just started to communicate bias and prejudice and to perhaps talk about them in negative ways. Okay, so again, Wiltshire may be liking the place so much and wishing to be there for the rest of his life, but he cannot. I mean, at the least provocation, he will show his true color. I mean, the fact that he is Victorian, the fact that he is white. Okay, so he wasn't too genuine, and we have to kind of make a distinction between Stevenson and Wiltshire, because obviously these I mean people are sometimes under the impression that there has to be a mouth piece for the author. The author has to be there through one of the characters. It doesn't happen or go this way. Okay, so don't ever confuse Wiltshire with Stevenson. Stevenson was very genuine in his efforts. He decided to leave his legacy and to leave England behind, and the popularity that he had over the years, and he started afresh over there on the islands in the South Seas. He is a totally different story. Wiltshire may again remember when the novel started, and all of a sudden we found him married to one of the natives. We didn't get to know that it was his choice, for example. Somehow he and the girl were kind of set up, and the next thing you know that they are a married couple. Did we get to know that he and there was a period where they perhaps communicated and they fell in love with each other? Was it love at, for example, at first sight? Even we don't have a reference to that. So it was, sometimes it happens with people, right? You are sometimes um, destined to go and stay in a place for a while, and all of a sudden you get your life fixed there, you get married there and you stay there. You never think, perhaps when you grow up and you start to reconsider what you have done, and you say, was it really my choice, or was I pushed and forced to do so? This is something that people who have the experience can tell us about. It happens. So again, I'm stressing the fact that Wiltshire never belonged to the island. At least this is what we have seen. At least this is what we haven't seen. I mean, we don't have evidence as evidence that show us that he was in love with the island and with the people, and he got married because he loved life there. And you wouldn't, when you talk about Case, for example, and the fight that he had with Case, and the fact that Case got killed, and he got, Wiltshire, he got the island rid of Case. He didn't do that because for the good of the island. It was, this was pure self-defense. If he doesn't kill Case, he will be killed by him somehow. It's only a matter of time. Okay? So you kill, otherwise you will get killed eventually. So it was pure self-defense, and it wasn't done in the interest of the island, right? Again, you may tell me that he got married and he had kids. Naturally, you get married, you have kids. So we were never told that he got kids because he loved the island. No, right?
Yes, but yani, doctor, so we can't say that abroad became home in his case.
Yeah, he
because this story
no,
is for
I
the
don't believe.
assignment. This part is mostly
We
for
were. If he is given the opportunity to go back home, he would welcome it. But remember, he is now entangled. When you live in a place for, let's say, 20 years, and you get married to somebody from this place, right? Um, I mean, going home, going to your original home, not your adopted home, would be difficult because people forgot about you, right? You don't have a job back there, and you have a family in this adopted home. Okay, so it can become home, but whether you're genuine about it, or it's because it has to be this way. This is okay. It is it is abroad. and he would welcome the opportunity to go back home, but he cannot. Like I said, it's a lot of obligations, okay? A lot of calculations. You have lived a substantial part of your life in another place, right? And it happens even with I mean some people يعني if you consider it, I mean when you talk about people I mean going to other countries and then live there for years and years, even if they're not married, if they have their own families, the idea of going back home and starting afresh would be a little bit difficult. Okay, I hope I am even close to what you're thinking of. Um, okay, so let's move to. Remember, we spoke about if we're talking about the idea of home and the idea of abroad, we're saying that this is, I mean, the novella is a statement in and of itself. And the fact that Stevenson is making a statement, okay, he's making a statement against what? Against colonialism, right? Again, against economic imperialism, the fact that these places um get exploited by whites. Also against the idea of miscegenation, and we spoke about miscegenation and we said interracial marriage. Okay, they don't feel comfortable if a mixed couple are getting married. Again, if we talk about technique, we said that يعني think of Wuthering Heights. It's similar to Wuthering Heights when it comes to this cross generic um, element to it, the fact that you have more than one genre. Remember, we spoke about realism, spoke about romance. See how the novella started and what it promised us. Of course, over time, you wouldn't have this promise fulfilled or delivered, but this is how it started. It started romance in terms of description and all, and also the romantic encounters, if any, within the novella, and the relationship of Wiltshire and Uma, because you cannot think of it otherwise. Okay, there has to be some kind of romance in terms of love and love interest, because they belong to two different cultures, and it should be made uh, uh, um, clear to us that they had shown interest in each other somehow. Okay. So the idea of accuracy, the fact that Stevenson uh, took pains in reproducing stuff that he has seen on these islands. He was trying to be as accurate as he possibly can. So we're talking about attitudes, practices, and beliefs and aspirations of the people on the islands. Also spoke about the idea of one possible theme of the novella would be the idea of contact zones, and this area on shores and coasts and ports where you normally have people gathering from different nationalities and from different cultures. And this is where cultural exchange takes place, whether on the literal level, I mean, you have physical uh, exchange in terms of the exchange of goods and commodities, and also you also have cultural exchange in terms of ideas and relationships. And we have seen that enacted and happening in the novella, right? Again, we would refer to the language that they would use. They would use a lingua franca, and we spoke about lingua franca language, a compromise language of sorts. And this lingua franca would be distorted, would be broken, because it is a mix of different local languages and a standard variety of a dominating language. So one significant statement made by Stevenson at one point, and if you ask me, it kind of sums up the whole idea, would be what he said in one of his essays. He says it's not only when we cross the seas that we go abroad. And he says Ireland, Wales, and the Scottish mountains still cling in part to their old Gaelic speech. Whatever he means by that. It's not obviously about the change of place, right? You can be home, but you feel abroad, right? And you can be abroad and you feel home, of course. This is more. Um, um, it happens. I mean, and this is what we normally refer to in modern times as, the idea of not belonging, the idea of the misfit. So what's a misfit? You are home in terms of ideas, in terms of culture, and in terms of conventions, and also in terms of place. But you have your mind and heart set somewhere else. Whether it's because you like this somewhere else and this is your nature, like in the case of Lockwood and Wuthering Heights, or whether I mean, you're not given the opportunity at home, you're you're not fairly treated. Perhaps you're a woman in a society of misogynists, those who hate women. Okay, and you feel that somewhere overseas, from perhaps the internet and television, you see that somewhere over there you can be perhaps more appreciated, more respected. I mean, your rights in life are safeguarded. You may feel you may not feel that you belong. Okay, so it happens, and I think one good reason why Stevenson went abroad and he had those sweet sensations about the abroad would be the idea that he didn't feel okay at home, especially the fact that he was perhaps sick and all. And you have people who are, they are not more, yani, they are not happy with the status quo. They want to, they want change and they want reform, and if they don't see it implemented and happening where they are, they opt for other places. So in the story, Uma uses an English-based pidgin to communicate with her husband, Wiltshire, and pidgin was used by islanders to negotiate with outsiders. So Stevenson's attempt to reproduce Pidgin English reflects his commitment to realism in the story. Yes, true. And even Wiltshire and Uma's domestic life is depicted in a realistic way. We have typical everyday marital arguments. I mean, typical of a man and his wife. With Wiltshire speaking in standard colloquial English and Uma using simple structure of Pidgin English. This is what you expect, and this is realistic. Okay, he would use his English, that is slang and colloquial, and she would use Pidgin English in order to be able to communicate with him. And they would talk about the Bible, they would talk about religion, and of course she would be more religious than he is. And normally new converts to new religions or to yes, they normally they are more staunch when it comes to the implementation of this new religion's rituals. And that would be a point of contention between him and her. Again, we spoke enough about the reaction and accusing him of being native himself, Stevenson, I mean, going native, and the fact that if he writes the way he writes about those or these people and on the islands, he is these are signs of decline for British people, of course. So despite the Wiltshire's domestic life, yeah, and despite the fact that his domestic life is a reflection and a representation of the idea of contact zone. I mean, he is a good example of that. He and his family. Um, Yani now that he's living the lifestyle of the islands, his interracial marriage to Uma and their offspring, despite all of that, he continues expressing racial prejudice till the end of the story. We have seen examples of that, how he refers to his children and the fact that he doesn't want them to get married to natives, right? So this is an indication that he couldn't overcome uh, um, and he cannot banish the idea of home from his mind. He still feels more English than perhaps ever before. He doesn't feel. I mean, he feels that something is missing. He feels perhaps some kind of homesickness. This is basically what this novella is about. As you can see, the focus is perhaps on the conflict that we have between home and abroad as given expression in the novella. Again, I would warn you to conflate the author with the central character Wiltshire. Obviously, they are different and they introduce two different experiences. So I would like to go to the new part, and I'll give you 3 to 4 minutes to kind of reflect on what we have been talking about in the Falesa. And if you have questions, please come forward with them, and then after that we make the transition to the new part and the new genre. Okay, you guys. So nobody's coming up with questions, which pretty much settles it. You don't have questions or concerns about the novella. Okay. Oh, Kamar wants to say something. Yes, go ahead. I'm waiting because Kamar is typing. Again, if you want to use the mic, go ahead.
Doctor, when we discussed this work in the TMA, because this work is the most confusing for me, when we discuss this work in the TMA, do we discuss it as in what was home for the Victorians
Let's
or
go
what was
back to the
home for
question. Remind me of the question because I don't remember.
Can I copy paste it in the chat?
Yeah, yes, please. Yes. Remember that we don't have identical TMAs. You don't have to write the self-same ideas. You start an argument and you go about developing it and building it up. Okay. So no identical TMAs. You have your own thoughts and your own ideas, and you are all able to come up with brilliant TMAs. Okay. So let me read. So the prompt, the TMA prompt says or reads: the expansion of the British Empire and the rise in immigration sharply affected how the Victorians thought of home in the 19th century. Through examining the three literary works we have studied, Bronte's Wuthering Heights, Doyle's The Sign of War, and Stevenson, The Beach of Falesa, discuss how home in both the domestic and national sense is not represented in a fixed way, challenging middle class notions of social propriety and mores. Mm. This was quite mouthful, quite big. Okay, it's you'll first of all you need to unpack the TMA prompt. Unpack it means that you have to understand it very well, and you need to shed and focus light on the different aspects. So if you unpack it, uh, um, unpacking would mean understanding it, right? So the overarching idea would be the idea of home and abroad, and how those ideas are not presented in a consistent way, if you like. We don't have consistency. Every writer has his own way of representing them, and this representation may correspond to uh, uh, and coincide with how society um, look at these you know values, and how society understands them. And sometimes you have a writer who deviates from the norms, deviates in terms of technique, and deviates in terms of theme. So again, if you ask me, you will have this reflected, the idea of deviation, in the two, um, in Wuthering Heights, and also in the Beach of Falesa. This is, we have deviation at its best. If you look at the sign of 4, um, I see the novel conforming to the notions of home and abroad as Victorians would see them. So your focus um, would be on Wuthering Heights and also Felisa, because of how different they are in the representation of the values and conventions of home and abroad, and also in them turning these ideas on their heads, not dealing with them the usual way. Again, you don't do that randomly. You do that because you have an agenda that you're trying to advance, right? Wuthering Heights has its own agenda, where Emily Bronte is obviously saying there is obviously more to life than just meets the eye, if you like. Life is more complex than what uh, we give it credit for. When you also look at the Beach of Felisa, like we said, Stevenson is making a statement, right? The statement has to do with um, the idea of tolerance, the idea of accepting other cultures, the idea of uh, um, you know humbling down. I mean, for a culture to humble down and to give other cultures the opportunity to kind of express themselves, to appear, because they simply have the right to exist in a dignified way. So he is discussing this. Let me read the prompt again. So the expansion of the British Empire and the rise in immigration sharply affected how the Victorians thought of home in the 19th century. So again, your starting point would be to talk about that, to talk about how uh, um, the expansion of the British Empire and the subsequent immigration of so many, either from the colonies to England or from England to the colonies, how all of that contributed to um, to an atmosphere and an environment and a marketplace of ideas that is that are not for the most part conformist ideas, that um, are sometimes new, ideas that are sometimes um, different, ideas that are sometimes offending of the existing and the established sensibilities of the Victorians. So discuss how home in both domestic and national sense is not represented in a fixed way. So it is true that the focus would be home, but you cannot talk about home unless you mention abroad, right? Because there is going to be a great deal of comparison and comparisons, right? You cannot help it, right? Okay, Arwa is obviously saying something. Arwa showed. So when we talk about home in Wuthering Heights, should I mention? Yeah, of course. Can you not mention Thrush Cross Grange? Can you not mention it? It's so entangled. It's so mixed up together. You cannot separate them from each other. Yeah, Arwa. I mean, even the idea, I mean, the focus would be on the idea of home. But how can you talk about home without referring to, abroad, right? My suggestion would be that you read the question very well. You read the TMA prompt, which you have already done. I mean, and then start the argument and start. I mean, looking for examples and illustrations that would be, um, supporting the line of thought that you're going to pursue. Because make no mistake about it. Uh, um, I mean, the ideas can be the same, but how you handle them would be different, right? Does this answer your question, yeah, Kamar? Nabila is saying, Doctor, I think we should write about how the three works, challenges the Victorian ideas. This is how you read. If this is how you read the TMA prompt and you understand it this way, and you're going to build your argument on that, it's fine. Again, it depends on how you see and how you understand the question. Okay? So I'm telling you that nothing is wrong. Uh, Unless you're totally off the mark. And totally off the mark means that you're talking about a totally different issue, which obviously uh, not what we have here. You guys are, whatever you're saying falls within the parameters of the TMA in terms of ideas. So you're doing fine. Just write, just start an argument and go about illustrating and providing examples. Kamar is saying home from the author point of view or the characters. Um, Obviously, the characters and the ideas in the novel or in the novels reflect the point of view of the author. Okay, are you getting the idea? Any further questions about the TMA? Okay. So okay, let's go to James Joyce and the Dubliners. First of all, let me ask you, when I say James Joyce, does the name ring any bells at the back of your minds? Arwa is also asking the opinion for the home. I don't call it opinion. I call them arguments and I call them contentions. Okay. Opinion gives the feeling and the impression that you're writing points, which we don't do in literature. Okay. Opinion has to do with perhaps I don't know. It's with literature, it's more fluid, right? Uh, um, yeah, yes. It is. I'm sorry. It is being recorded. Uh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Uh, okay. Let me just make this clear. We have started the class at 2 because the class started at 2 p.m. today on Friday, but we forgot to um, start the recording earlier. But this is a disclaimer. We have started earlier. Okay. Okay. So let me just also talk about what we did. It was the beach of Falesa, and we're done with it. And then after that, we spoke about the TMA and how to unpack the TMA and how to handle it, and the different approaches that people may have. And I said there is obviously more to the TMA than viewpoints. It's about starting an argument and going about proving it and building it up. Um, Now we're shifting gears to The Dubliners by James Joyce, and my question is about Joyce and whether the name Joyce or James Joyce ring or rings any bell at the back of your minds. One of you, I think, let me check. Kamar is saying that I heard about Ulysses by him. Kamar is also saying when studying Candide, I read a list of banned books, and Ulysses happened to be one of them. Yes, by Joyce, of course. Any other ideas about Joyce? So James Joyce, okay, a novelist, primarily a novelist, Irish, okay, and we call him a modernist writer. And if we say modernist, it means that we are having a shift of focus. Uh, we're not 19th century anymore. We're moving to the 20th century. and we're not only moving in terms of time, we're also moving in terms of place, because we are doing uh, uh, a set of short stories that are set uh, in uh, in uh, in in Ireland by an Irish writer. So that we're moving from England to Ireland, and the movement is not just another movement. We're moving from one culture to another. We're moving from one set of conventions to another, a totally different set of conventions. We're moving from one set of concerns to a totally different set of concerns. Again, we're moving from one set of techniques to a whole lot different set of techniques. We're moving from the 19th century, which with its established conventions when it comes to novel writing and literature in general, to the 20th century with its experimentation with the genres, with its realism, with its ideas of modernism and modernity. We're talking about the 20th century, where there were two world wars where millions of people got killed, sometimes for no obvious reasons. We're moving away from the comfort of the 19th century, where the challenges in the 19th century would pale by comparison when we talk about the challenges of the 20th and the 21st century. Okay, the perspectives are totally different, and what makes them different would be um, what what the 20th century represents in terms of wars, in terms of values that are turned on their heads, a great deal. Again, with Joyce, the focus would be on the idea of experimentation. The focus would be on the idea of modernism as a technique, and I mean modernist tools, um, modernist tools to recapture reality. Um, a great deal. We're going to talk about a great deal of ideas that belong to the early 20th century. Again, the setting is different. We're not in England anymore. We're not on one of the islands in the Pacific and the South Seas. We are in Ireland. And when I say Ireland, um a set of associations will pop up. We With Ireland, we talk about also the idea of colonization, the fact that for much of its history, Ireland was under the dominion and the control of Britain. It was part of the British Empire, and it was treated like all the other colonies. They were dehumanized, they were suppressed, they were taken advantage of, they were material enough to exploit, to mock and make fun of. So why am I saying that? Because this would be uh, um, uh, important material for us to reflect on. You will have from time to time go back to reasons why the British were dealing with the Irish this way. I mean, presenting them in their literature as lazy, as uneducated, as rustic. So a bit of talk about the history of the conflict is due and is very important. Unless you understand this historical background, lots of ideas, lots of the remarks made will miss you, or you will miss them. So if you look at the map, I think I'm still sharing the screen, right? This is the map of Europe, and as you can see, I mean, can you see Ireland on the map? Okay. So where is it? If you Is it in the west or the east or the south or the north? It is actually two things, right? It is west, right? And it is also um, do you think it's north? I don't think it's yeah, I don't I think it's like more or less like central. It depends on how I mean, it's more to the north, like Nabila is saying. It's definitely west, right? It's definitely West Europe, and it is north of Europe too. So what do you know about those people who live in uh, North Europe? Any idea about these kinds of people? Have you ever been to Ireland? Let me put it this way. No, right? You have never been to Ireland, right? No, right? Yes or no? No. Okay. Okay. So, no is saying never, yes. Okay. This is, can you see Ireland now? This is the world map, obviously, right? Can you see that? Okay. Now, this way I've seen. Okay. So what is it that we're having now? We're having Ireland, right? But these are obviously, can you see Ireland now, right? Yes, they are too white and their hair is reddish for the most part. Yes. Sometimes, I mean, yeah, sometimes they are also, this color, I mean, it's white, but it looks reddish. It gives you the impression that they are not too white, like you're saying. They have, uh, if there is something called dark white, and this dark whiteness is normally, yes, is normally related to the fact that historically they were um, not, they were poor. They had to work hard. So if you work hard, then it's perhaps you work on farms and it's sunny and it's muddy. Your shape and how you look gets affected. Anyway, so what part of Ireland are we dealing with? We're dealing with Dublin, the capital city, and Dublin is an old city. Old in the sense that it has always been there since the Romans, and it has enjoyed, or at one point it enjoyed, you know, prestige and uh, prosperity and all these kinds of things. But perhaps with the British occupation in, I don't know, 17th or 18th century, uh, um, Dublin has dwindled in terms of importance, in terms of prestige, even in terms of economic state. I mean, the people started to suffer because of course, under occupation, you wouldn't prosper, and countries wouldn't prosper if they are occupied. And there was a deliberate um, attempt on the part of the English to obliterate and get rid of cultural identity. And they did a number of things. One of them would be to impose the English language. Otherwise, I mean, the Irish would have spoken a different language. They have their own language, which is more or less called Gaelic, and it's a totally different language from English. So the English at one point would try their hardest to obliterate and diminish the Irish culture and the language, in order to keep the Irish in total servitude all the time. If you don't have a history to fall back on, if you don't have a legacy, it's easy for people to kind of control and dominate you. You don't have anything to get inspired by, some fuel from the past that can keep you going. If this is typical of occupiers, they do just that. They make sure that you don't have access to your identity, to your past, to your history. Again, if you don't have any of that, and if you don't have a recollection of any of that, you become an easy victim to them and to their plans and calculations, evil as they are. Because make no mistake about it, no occupier is a good one. I mean, they are all bad, like. Anyway, this is obviously the subject of another day. Um, so what I mean, the city that we're dealing with would be Dublin, and like I said, Dublin had um, a prestigious history that is no more. The moment that we're talking about and addressing is uh, the 20th century, when Dublin is having lots of issues, lots of concerns, lots of ills and evils, socially, politically, and of course economically. And this is and these are the moments that um, James Joyce is capturing in his short stories. So, where was Joyce when he wrote the short stories? Was he in Dublin living there? No, he was on the continent. He was in Europe. Uh, he was an international author in the sense that he doesn't have one place to operate from. He was between France and Geneva and Switzerland. I don't know whether he went to Italy at one point. So he lived on the continent, but of course he lived a substantial part of his life in his native and in Dublin. He knows about it in and out, and he also receives reports. I mean, he cannot shut his eyes and ears against what was happening in his country and in his native town, Dublin. So, those short stories that we're going to handle have all those concerns. The conflict between um, modernity and traditions, the conflict between um, religion and freedom, the dominance of the clergy and religion, no liberalism. People are so set in their old ways and they don't want to change. Dublin is not a welcome or a welcoming place when it comes to new ideas and new thoughts. For a man like Joyce, that would be catastrophic, and that would be a continuation of the sad state of affairs that he was trying to kind of address in Ireland and in Dublin specifically. So as you can see, these are the issues that James Joyce is addressing. The different polarities that we have in Dublin, the clash between modernity and conventions and traditions, the clash between liberal thought and conservative thought, the clash between Catholics and Protestants, the clash between the old generation and the new generation. There is a battle or a war of wills, WILLS, going on between and among the different generations. The old generation is or does not want to give way to the new generation, and the new generation is lost. They don't know whether to stick to the old ideas or to chart new ways. So this is going to be the ideas that we're going to address in the series of short stories that we'll have. Of course, we'll not be able to finish all the short stories, and we're actually not required to finish all of them. We'll have a number of them. The number of short stories that we'll have will reflect the ideas that we're talking about. Would be representations of the ideas that we have just spoken about. So, what are the ideas? What are the short stories that we'll have? We'll have The Sisters, one of the short stories. And when we finish with The Sisters, we're going to have something by the title of An Encounter. An Encounter, another short story. And then we're going to have Eveline. Eveline is a third short story. And we're going to conclude this part, I think, with Eveline. Yeah. Next time we'll have a couple of short stories together with the longest of them all, which is The Dead. The Dead happens to be the longest short story in the collection of short stories that has the name Dubliners or The Dubliners. Again, the title of the collection of short stories is very significant, and it can tell you a great deal about what to expect in these collections. When I say it's The Dubliners, so what do you understand, or what comes to your mind? Okay, so Kamar is saying the people of Dublin. Okay, so in what way? You mean their concerns, what they are grappling with, their ideas, right? Issues that they have. Yes, yes, their struggles and their concerns. Yes, good. Okay. So chapter 1, James Joyce, Dubliners, city, theme, and period. This is what we're handling or addressing today. We're talking about James Joyce, the author. We're talking about Dubliners, the book of short stories that we're handling. We're going to talk about the city of Dublin, and we're going to talk about the Dubliners, the short story, as city texts, and we're going to unpack the concept, talk about themes, and also the period. So in terms of biography, Joyce was born in 1882. I mean, his father was okay financially, but at one point he would, uh, you know, would stop being. So he's going to, his money is going to run out, and I mean, the family will have to move from one house to another, to the extent that James Joyce has calculated the movement, and he said that he has lived in 23 different homes before he decided to leave Dublin altogether. So this 23 figure tells you how much the family has, or the family fortune or fortunes have dwindled. James Joyce himself was well educated. He used to frequent Jesuit schools, and these are schools that are religious for the most part. A word here is very important, and you need to always remember that James Joyce is Catholic. And when we talk about um, writers in terms of religion, they are all mainstream Protestant writers, and some of them, those who perhaps belong to Spain, France, Italy, and here Ireland, are for the most part Catholic, and Catholicism is an offshoot, of course, of Christianity, but they are more conservative, less liberal with their rituals and stuff, and they have a reputation with education. They focus on education, and their education has a great deal of morality to it. The focus is on manners and morality, perhaps at the expense of perhaps liberal ideas and freedom. So you need to always remember that he was Catholic. You need to always remember that he is a graduate of Jesuit schools. Normally, those kinds of writers who are Catholic, and those who receive perhaps conservative religious education, at one point they would revolt against their training, their religious training. They would kind of find faults with what they have been trained to do. But it's only natural that, as you're going to see, that James Joyce, the Irish, the Catholic, is resisting and fighting and challenging some of the things that, or some of the ideas that he has been trained to embrace for a substantial part of his life. So he had a degree in modern languages at University College Dublin. So before he left Dublin forever, he had a degree in languages. Of course, having a degree in languages and then working as an author would make all the difference, because when you learn languages, you get insights into how languages work, and you can manipulate that in your works. Again, in terms of careers, he tried his hand in different careers. He wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be. He tried his hand with music, and he wanted to be a singer. And he also taught. Again, he would move from one career to another, different career shifts. Again, these are different careers. I mean, these are different levels of contact with people, that would give you insights into human nature, of course. If we talk about what he did in terms of works, so Ulysses will stand out as the most important work or novel. Together with Ulysses, we also have a portrait of the artist as a young man. This is a very famous novel. And we also have the Dubliners, this collection of short stories that we're handling. Again, Ulysses remains one, uh, I mean, the most important work, because with him, with it, you have Joyce as a modernist writer, and also as an experimental writer, somebody who tries his hand. And with Ulysses, we have lots of new techniques and new ideas that would make of Joyce a pioneer. When we talk about stream of consciousness, when we talk about and delving deep into the inner recesses of characters, with Ulysses you have uh, um, Joyce pioneering and championing I mean um, new novels and new novel techniques that like the novel of psychology, like I said, the technique of stream of consciousness. So the focus, as you're going to see, would not be on the action, and the focus would be on the character and what goes on inside the character, the psychology of the character. The focus would be also not on noble figures and noble characters, or characters that we want to be noble. No, the focus would be on um, everyday human beings, people that you can relate to, people that you can meet in the street. And for people like Joyce, you don't have literary decorum or propriety anymore. Everything under the sun is discussed, whether it conforms with your sensibility or whether it challenges your sensibilities. Everything. I mean, politics, um, religion, sex, everything, you name it. They handle and they talk about it without any fear, without any reservation. Now, if we move to the novel, the short stories that we have, or set of short stories, it's called Dubliners, and like we said, Dubliners indicates that we are in for um, talk and issues and ideas about um Dublin, the capital city of Ireland. But perhaps before we start talking about the different short stories, we need to define, or we need to kind of agree on what a short story is, and also agree on the elements of short stories. Because obviously there is a big difference between a short story and a novel, and you shouldn't be approaching the short story the way you approach a novel. So, what's your definition of a short story? And let me ask you if you have done short stories before, and if you have names and titles. Go ahead. Yanov is saying short stories are about one single plot, such as the yellow wallpaper. Okay, that's so as the label indicates, they are short, right? And they are so focused that they focus on one single plot, like Nov is saying, right? So the idea of focus and the idea of condensation are very important in a short story. Uh, Again, whatever you can say in volumes and in hundreds of pages, you also handle in short stories, right? So it's not the themes and the issues that distinguish a short story from a novel, because you can handle, or you can talk about the two in these two different genres. It's the techniques that you use in each. With novels, you're not in a hurry. You have all the space and all the time there are to write. Okay, no limits, obviously. That's why we end up having novels that have hundreds of pages, that are hundreds of pages long. With short stories, no, this is not the case. You wouldn't be given the opportunity to even elaborate on your ideas. Unless you are really talented, you wouldn't be able to write good short stories. Short stories are about brevity. You're being brief. And brevity not at the expense of quality. You wouldn't compromise the quality of the short story because it's short. No. That's why short stories are not for everyone. Not all writers can be short story writers, but so many can be novel writers, because obviously they don't have the limitations and the restrictions that they usually have in a short story. So again, the focus would be on single things, a single effect that you are trying to communicate to the reader, a single plot, right? A single setting, perhaps, uh, and the number of characters wouldn't be, of course, too many, right? You can have up to 3 or 4, um, because the more the characters, the more the issues and ideas, and you're so focused in a short story, so you cannot handle everything, right? So that's why you have limits on how many characters there are. Yes, Nabila is giving us examples of short stories that she has read, right? And the common denominator, if any, would be the idea of brevity and the idea of single effect. What you're working towards in a short story is the singularity of effect. Okay? You don't have the ambition, and you're not allowed to have it. You don't have the ambition to advance so many ideas and so many themes. You don't have to do that. You'll have to focus on one single idea that would bring about that singularity of effect that we're talking about. It's good that lots of people are giving us lots of examples from short stories that they have read and done. So if we talk about the elements of short story, we will have characters, we'll have setting, we'll have point of view, we'll have plot, and we will have themes, right? So these are the 5 elements of the short story. Conflict, conflict in Nabila is part of the plot. At the core of the plot is a conflict or a number of conflicts. Okay. Uh, I think I'm doing I'm doing EL 121N this semester, and I have recorded classes. If you want, go to the this YouTube channel that we have. Access it. You're going to have so many videos that address the different elements, and we have examples as how you can deal with short stories. Again, let's go back to the short stories, and uh, again I'll address myself primarily to the idea of characters and to the idea of singularity of effect. Singularity of effect means that you have an idea or two and you're trying to advance them. Advance them means that you're trying to kind of get them across to the reader. Get them across, showing the reader how you feel about them, and perhaps having him on your side when you talk about them. Again, you do that using a number of techniques. In terms of characters, you will have to give us the characters, and then we judge whether these characters are flat or round characters, are major or minor. You give us a setting, and we check whether the setting, in terms of time and place, whether the setting is instrumental in furthering the action of the short story or not. You give us a plot, and you give us entanglements and conflicts, and we check whether the conflicts would also help communicate the messages that you're trying to communicate. And of course, that those elements, all of them, would contribute towards the theme that you're trying to the themes and the ideas that you're trying to promote, that you're trying to communicate to the reader. What you're saying are, small details in a bill. I'm talking about the big picture, if you like. Okay. Okay. So with that said, okay, Nof is saying that she has to go. I think we all have to go. So we'll continue that when we meet again on is it Sunday that we're Sunday or Monday? Monday, right? So we're meeting again inshallah on Monday, and we'll take the short stories to the next level and read them, unpack them, and talk about the issues that Joyce is addressing in them. So until then, I wish you all the best.